On May 31st, 2013, near Reno, Oklahoma, the evening still looked almost ordinary. Cars moved along rural roads, farmers were closing gates, and beyond the flat horizon, a dark wall of clouds was slowly building. In Oklahoma, that alone was not unusual. People here were used to watching the sky. They were used to sirens, warnings, hail, and the word tornado. But that evening, even people who had spent their lives chasing storms did not fully understand what was forming in front of them. This was not just another tornado. It was a violent, unpredictable machine that changed shape, speed, and direction faster than humans could react. The final 7 minutes of the Twistex team would become one of the most terrifying moments in the history of storm research. Tim Samaras was not a reckless thrill-seeker looking for dramatic footage. He was an engineer, a respected researcher, and a man who had spent decades trying to understand what happens inside a tornado during the few seconds when normal air becomes a rotating engine of destruction. With him were his son, Paul Samaras, and their colleague, Carl Young. They were not out there for adrenaline. They were out there for data pressure readings, wind measurements, and instruments that could survive the direct impact of a tornado. They were chasing information that might one day help save lives. But on this day, nature showed them that even experience has a limit. By the morning of May 31st, forecasters already knew the atmosphere over central Oklahoma was becoming dangerous. Warm, humid air was moving in from the south. A dry line was pushing from the west. Above it all, strong wind shear was setting up winds moving at different speeds and directions at different levels of the atmosphere. To an ordinary person, these are just weather terms. To a meteorologist, they are warning signs. This is how supercells are born. This is how the sky begins to rotate. During the afternoon, instability continued to increase. The air became heavy, wet, and almost electric. The wind would go calm for a moment, then suddenly push the grass in one direction. On radar, the first signs of rotation appeared. Not a disaster yet, not at first, but something was wrong. The models suggested that the storms could become strong, then very strong. And then the thing everyone feared began to happen. Around 6 o'clock in the evening, southwest of Reno, a tornado dropped from the supercell. At first, it did not look like a record-breaking monster. From a distance, it appeared as a dark, dirty, rain-wrapped mass, partly hidden inside the storm. It was not the clean, narrow funnel people imagine from textbooks. It was not a perfect cone that could be clearly seen for miles. It was chaotic, muddy, and hard to read. That made it far more dangerous. As the tornado developed, some residents were still trying to decide what to do. Others were already getting into their cars. Some wanted to reach relatives. Some thought they could drive away from the danger. Some simply wanted to escape the sirens and the blackening sky. But a vehicle is one of the most deceptive shelters near a tornado.
I can't wait.
You think you have speed, but the tornado has space. You think you can see the danger, but inside a curtain of rain, the danger may already be around you. Traffic began to build on the roads. People called their families. Radio stations repeated the warnings. Meteorologists on television grew more urgent. This was a dangerous situation. Do not wait. Take shelter.
Ground immediately.
Meanwhile, the storm kept growing.
The roads are closed. I'm not
The tornado
moving.
moved toward the Reno and Union City area, damaging farms, snapping trees, tearing metal apart, and leaving debris scattered across open fields. But from the outside, it could still appear as if the main funnel was somewhere ahead. The visible part was only part of the truth. Inside the enormous circulation, smaller vortices were already spinning, tornadoes within the tornado. They appeared and disappeared like blades hidden in dust and rain. Each one could be more violent than the larger tornado looked from the outside. This was the great deception of Reno. People were watching for one funnel, but the real danger zone was several miles wide. Tim Samaras and the Twistex team were positioned on roads southeast of Reno. They were trying to find the right angle, assess the tornado's movement, get close enough to collect data, but not cross the invisible line where science ends and survival begins. For an experienced storm chaser, this is always a calculation. Where is the center of rotation? Where is it moving? How fast is it moving? Is there an escape route? But that evening, the answers changed faster than the questions. The tornado first moved southeast. Then it turned east.
Moving east
Then
now.
it began to expand.
And the
Its
circulation
speed
is
increased.
widening rapidly.
Its edges
This is
blurred into
becoming a very
rain.
dangerous
What looked
situation.
on radar like the movement of a single point felt on the ground like an entire wall of atmosphere moving across the landscape. Then came the turn that transformed a dangerous chase into a deadly trap.
It's shifting right.
The tornado suddenly shifted north.
Get us closer, but
Not
watch
gradually,
that crosswind.
not predictably. It was as if the storm had changed its mind. For people on the roads, that meant one terrifying thing. A position that seemed safe could become deadly within minutes.
It's flooded, we can't go.
Around Highway 81 and the rural roads near El Reno, confusion
the wind
spread
is picking up.
fast. Some vehicles tried to escape east. Others moved north. Some drivers turned around. Some stopped because they no longer understood where the danger was. Rain hammered the windshields. Hail struck the roofs of cars. The sky dropped so low that the horizon disappeared. The wind stopped feeling like wind. It became pressure. It hit from the side, then from the front, then from every direction at once. Debris did not fly in one clean line. It swirled. Dirt, grass, branches, metal and rain mixed into a grey-brown wall. In moments like that, the human brain searches for a simple image. Where is the tornado? But El Reno did not give people that image. It was too wide, too dirty, and too layered. The final 7 minutes of Twistex were not like a movie scene where the heroes see a giant funnel in front of them and know they have to run. It was worse. It was the moment when experienced people who knew how to read
Take the
storms,
next right, we need to
found
get closer
themselves
to the
inside a
enclosure.
situation where the storm itself
I
was
can barely
breaking the
see the
rules
road,
they
hold on.
understood. They were moving along rural roads where every
Radar
turn
confirms the
mattered,
hook echo,
where
we
gravel
have to
could
assume
steal
circulation.
seconds, where rain
Agreed.
reduced
Turning
visibility
south
to a
on the next
blur,
paved road.
and where there was no simple way to press the gas and disappear. The road was limited, time was shrinking, and the wind was already too close. By around 6:20 p.m., the tornado was still expanding. It was no longer a narrow funnel. It had become an enormous rotating circulation. Its maximum width would later be estimated at around 2.6 miles, more than 4 kilometers. Imagine an entire city district, several neighborhoods side by side, a whole section of land from one horizon to the other, and all of it part of one tornado. But even that was not the most frightening part. The most frightening part was what was happening inside it. Mobile radar would later detect winds of nearly 295 miles per hour, close to the ground in small subvortices. Those were catastrophic winds, capable of turning vehicles into wreckage. Winds that do not simply push, they lift, throw, twist, and destroy orientation. From the outside, the storm could look like a dark curtain. Inside, it was a grinder made of air. In those minutes, the tornado accelerated and came closer than many realized. It was no longer moving the way people expected. It was widening, turning,
Look
and
at the
hiding its
rotation
most
on the
violent
radar.
parts
It's
inside a dirty
intensifying.
grey wall. For storm
We're right in the
chasers,
hook echo.
this was almost the worst possible combination. Massive width, poor visibility, sudden changes in direction, and inner vortices that seemed to live their own lives. At that point, reputation did not matter. Years of experience did not matter. Being an expert did not make a person immune. Because there was one road, very little time, and the tornado was no longer just ahead. It was around them. The Twistex vehicle ended up near Reuter Road and Radio Road, in rural land southeast of El Reno. There, one of the subvortices inside the larger circulation struck their car. It was not an ordinary gust of wind. It was the impact of a rotating force no steering wheel could overcome. The white Chevrolet Cobalt was lifted and destroyed. A car built for roads met an atmosphere that, in those seconds, acted like a gigantic invisible press. Metal folded, glass vanished, debris was thrown across the field. Tim Samaras, Paul Samaras, and Carl Young were killed. 3 men who had approached tornadoes in the name of science became victims of one of the most unpredictable storms ever documented. But the disaster did not end with Twistex. Other people were trapped that evening too. All 8 people killed directly by the tornado were in vehicles. That detail is chilling. Not in homes, not in basements, not in shelters, in cars. The very things they hoped would help them escape. On Interstate 40 and the nearby roads, drivers faced the same nightmare. Visibility collapsing, wind changing direction, water covering the road, and a massive rotating circulation swallowing everything around it. Some believed they had driven far enough away. But when a tornado is more than 4 kilometers wide, far enough, can become an illusion. Later, across the fields, investigators would find marks that could not be mistaken for anything else. Strips of torn-up grass, scoured earth, pieces of vehicles scattered across open land, damaged homes and metal structures, bent utility poles, tracks from sub-vortices, as if giant claws had dragged across the ground. But even those marks did not tell the full truth. The official enhanced Fujita scale rates tornadoes by the damage they cause. If extreme winds pass over open fields and do not hit enough strong structures, the rating may end up lower than the real wind speeds suggest. That is why El Reno became a debate between radar measurements and official damage-based rules. Based on damage, it was rated EF3. Based on measured winds, it produced winds at the level of an EF5 monster. This is not just a technical detail, it is the central lesson of El Reno. Sometimes the most dangerous tornado does not leave behind the classic image of total urban destruction because its strongest winds pass over fields instead of dense neighborhoods. But if that same circulation had moved over a crowded suburb, the story could have been far worse. Oklahoma City was close, too close. And when meteorologists later studied the path, many understood that the region had avoided a much larger tragedy by only a few miles. After El Reno, the attitude toward storm chasing changed. It was the day even professionals saw that old confidence was not enough. You cannot judge a tornado only by the visible funnel. You cannot assume that because the center appears far away you are safe. You cannot forget that a large rain-wrapped tornado can hide its deadliest parts inside a dirty grey wall. And above all, you cannot rely on a car as your escape plan if there is still time to take shelter. The final minutes of Twistex became more than a tragedy. They became a warning that nature does not have to follow human expectations. A warning that a radar screen is not the same thing as the ground beneath your tires. A warning that technology can show rotation, but it cannot make you feel the moment when the windshield turns black with rain, the horizon disappears, and the world outside the car becomes one moving mass. Tim Samaras spent his life trying to look inside tornadoes so people could understand them better. He built instruments, measured pressure, and studied the seconds that most people will never see and should never have to see. That is what makes the story of El Reno so painful. It is not simply a story about people underestimating a storm. It is a story about how sometimes caution, knowledge, and experience are still too small against a phenomenon that changes faster than human reaction. On May 31, 2013, the El Reno tornado crossed rural Oklahoma and left behind more than destruction. It left behind a question that still feels unsettling. If a storm like this could deceive some of the best, what could it do to people who had no idea what was coming? The answer is simple and terrifying. With a tornado, you do not need to be a hero. You do not need to test how close you can get. You do not need one more shot, one more angle, or one more minute. Because for the El Reno tornado, those final 7 minutes were not the end of a chase. They were proof that sometimes the most dangerous part of a disaster begins at the exact moment when people believe they have calculated everything.